Okay, so today's lesson we're looking at solving quadratic equations. And what we focused on before this has been breaking down quadratic equations or factorizing quadratic equations. So the new thing we're looking at today is solving and what that actually means. So we're asked first of all, well, what is a quadratic equation? A quadratic equation, an equation obviously has to have an equals, and a quadratic is anything that has an x squared. Okay, so you can have an x squared plus maybe a 4x plus a 2. So that'll be a general quadratic equation. Let that equal to 0. And what we're going to try and do today is we're going to focus on solving. So we're going to focus on working this out. Okay, so my first example here is x squared minus x minus 6. And so the only part really that's different to factorization is that now we have an equals part, and it just requires one extra step. So my first step is obviously to factorize. And to factorize, I'm going to do my back-to-back brackets. I'm going to let that equal 0 at the end. I'm going to focus on my factors for 6 or minus 6, and so I can have a 6 and a 1 and a 3 and a 2. And remember, I'm looking for the coefficient of the x, so the number in front of the x, and in this case I am looking for a minus 1x. So just getting a little bit quicker at these, I can see that if I use the 3 and the 2, that will work out. Obviously this is quite handy for me. I just have a 1x squared, which means I just place an x in the first bracket and an x in the second bracket. I'm going to use the factors of 3 and 2, so I'm going to place a 3 here and a 2 here, and I need minus 1, so I'm going to make this a minus and this a plus, and I'm going to do a quick check. Minus 3 times x gives me minus 3x, and x times plus 2 gives me 2x, and if I add them together I get minus 1x, which is what I wanted up here. So I've done that correctly. So step 1 is to factorize, and nothing new there. We have done many of these in class and at home. But as you know, we're now not dealing with a quadratic expression, we're dealing with a quadratic equation, which means we now have this equals 0, and it will require one further step to work out. We're asked to solve it, so find me an answer for x that when I substitute it in, I should get 0. And what I did here was, first of all, I factorized it, x minus 3x plus 2, and step 2 is to let each of those brackets equal 0. So I'll just pull that over a little bit, equal 0. So I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so that I have a little bit more room to work with. So the first bracket I have is this one here, x minus 3. So I'm going to let that equal 0. And I'm going to draw a line, and I'm going to let the second bracket, which is x plus 2, equal 0. Okay, so let's solve this bracket here. So we're going to solve it using our balancing method. And remember, I want x on this side, everything else on the other. So essentially I want to get rid of this minus 3. So if I add 3 to this side, well, I must do the same to the other side. The minus 3 and the plus 3 will cancel. So they're gone. And I'm now left with x equals 3. So I have solved that part. Moving on to the second part here, I have x plus 2 equals 0. So I am going to, again, I'm going to minus 2 here and minus 2 here so that I'm balancing. The plus 2 and the minus 2 cancel, and I'm now left with x is equal to minus 2. And what I've done here, second years, is I've actually solved the quadratic equation. I've given two numbers, x is equal to 3 and x is equal to minus 2, that if I substitute them into this original equation, I will get 0. I'm going to check them first now, just so we can see where that has come from. So again, let's make that a little bit smaller. I'm going to move that up. And so originally my equation was x squared minus 1x or minus x minus 6 equals 0. So I'm saying, right, well, if x is equal to 3, this should work. So that would be 3 all to be squared minus 1 times 3 minus 6 equals 0. So let's check that. 3 squared is 9, and 9 minus 3 minus 6 will give me 0. So that is true. I can do the exact same for the second answer that I gave. And the second answer I gave was this one here, x is equal to minus 2. So if I chance that one, if I substitute that in to the equation, I should get a 0 as well. So I would have minus 2 all to be squared here, minus 1 times minus 2, minus 6 equals 0. So let's see, does that work? And minus 2 squared is going to give me 4, and minus by minus gives me a plus here, and I'm going to have plus 2, and then I have minus 6. Does that give me 0? It does. 4 plus 2 is 6, minus 6 gives me 0. So that's just a way to check your answers. If they ask you to check, then this is how you do it. You do it through substitution. If you're not asked to check, though, you can just assume that these are your answers here. So the question asked me to solve this quadratic equation. Step 1, I factorize as I have always done. Step 2, I let each bracket equal 0. And what I've found is I've found 2 answers that will work to give me 0 when I substitute them into this equation. Just going to do another example here, example 2. Solve x squared plus 3x minus 2. And if you see the x squared, you need to be thinking about a quadratic, unless it's a difference of 2 squares. The best thing you can always do is have this written as a quadratic that equals 0. So that's what I'm going to do first of all. My original quadratic is x squared plus 3x equals minus 2. But I would like a 0 on this bit here. So I'm going to balance this equation out so that I get a 0. So I am going to plus a 2 here and plus a 2 on this side. You will notice that the minus 2 and the plus 2 cancel. And now my new equation is x squared plus 3x plus 2 equals 0. So just that little step I needed to do here just to get it looking in the correct way. So we have our 2 steps. Step 1 is to factorize. So I'm going to do my back-to-back brackets. I'm focusing on the factors of 2, which are just 2 and 1. And in this case, I just have an x squared, so it'll be x and x. And I'm looking for 3x, so nice and easy, it's just going to be a plus and a plus. We can do a little check. This gives me 2x, and this gives me 1x, which gives me 3x. Just give myself a bit more room. Gives me 3x. So that's fine. So the second step then is to let each bracket equal 0. So my first bracket is x plus 2 equals 0. I'm going to draw the line then. And the second bracket is x plus 1 equals 0. And we just solve these. And I'm going to make this a bit so that I have a bit more room. Again, we're going to do the balancing. So I would like just my x on this side, everything else on the other. So I want to get rid of the plus 2. I can balance it if I put a minus 2 here. But I must do what I do to one side, I must do to the other. They will cancel, and I'll be left with x equals minus 2. And subsequently on this one, again, I want just x on one side, everything else on the other. So if I balance it with a minus 1 on both sides, they cancel, and I'm left with x equals minus 1. If the question asks you to check your answers, you go back and you say, right, well, if x is minus 2, and I substitute it into this, will I get minus 2 here? So let's check and see, does that be the case? So the original equation was x squared plus 3x equals minus 2. I am now saying that, well, if x is minus 2, this will work, which means it'll be minus 2 to be squared plus 3 times minus 2 equals minus 2. Minus 2 to be squared. Minus by minus gives me a plus, and 2 2's are 4. Minus 6 equals minus 2, and that is correct. And again, I can just check the same with this one here. On this question, I was saying that x is equal to minus 1. So again, my original equation was x squared plus 3x equals minus 2. So if x is minus 1, it'll be minus 1 to be squared plus 3 times minus 1 is equal to minus 2. And minus 1 to be squared gives me 1 minus 3, which does equal minus 2. So that is, of course, true as well. So depending on the question, if the question just says to solve, then I can actually stop my work at this point here, where I've said x is equal to minus 2 and x is equal to minus 1. If the question says solve and check your answer, you just bring it on this extra step where you substitute your answers in just to make sure you've got the right one. So that's the overview of example 2. Okay, so we're now on to the last slide, which is tonight's learning check. So tonight's learning check is to take this first quadratic equation and solve it, and then check your answer. So you're going to do the 2 steps there. You're going to factorize and you're going to substitute in. And the exact same with question number 2. And I'll see everybody in class the next day.